So definitely the prioritization of Indian Ocean in India's strategic thinking is more than Australia, which is a country which faces 3 oceans.
You're listening to the USSC Briefing Room, a podcast from the United States Study Centre at the University of Sydney, where we give you a seat at the table for a USSC briefing on the latest developments in US news and foreign policy. We'll cover what you need to know and what's beneath the surface of the news. Hello, I'm Mari Kirk, Director of Engagement and Impact at the United States Study Centre. Thanks for joining us on the USSC Briefing Room today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're recording on today. The University of Sydney is located on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. We saw significant changes in India's relationship with key international partners in 2025. The tariff standoff with the United States brought the relationship to its lowest point in decades. Shortly after that, Narendra Modi was at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China in close meetings with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. Ties with Australia strengthened, and an Indian defense minister visited Australia for the first time in 12 years in October. What is driving these changes in India's international relationships, and will they have a long-term impact? Where is the future of India-US and India-Australia relationships headed? To discuss these questions, I'm delighted to welcome Roshali Saha on the podcast. She's USSC's Maitree Fellow, and she is an independent researcher and analyst with Horizon Intelligence. She has previously worked with several New Delhi-based think tanks and was a visiting fellow at the Stimson Center. Roshali, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Miri. I'm very excited to be here.
And at the end of the episode, we'll get you by the numbers stat on India's international relations, so I'm looking forward to hearing that. So I guess to kick things off, what developments in India's international relationships over the past 12 months stand out to you as the most significant?
So I think 2025 was a very, very significant and also challenging year for India's diplomacy. A lot happened, but a few developments do stand out to me. I'll start with the launch of India's Operation Sindoor, which was the counterterrorism measure against Pakistan following the Pahalgam attacks, which resulted in 26 deaths. For India, it's important because it indicated a doctrinal shift. It was India's response that it is going to respond militarily to terrorist action. For strategic partners, it is important because this was New Delhi's message that it is looking support from them for its position on counterterrorism. And in a sense, it is a softer sort of a with or without us approach when it comes to counterterrorism. And that will be very important in shaping how New Delhi's relationships with other key partners play out. So I think that was a very important development. The second would be the announcement of Mahasagar, which stands for Mutual and Holistic Advancement for Security and Growth for All in the region. It is an update to the existing Sagar doctrine, which was security and growth for all in the region, which was the dominant policy for the past decade. Through Mahasagar, what India tried to do was signal its intention to take on more responsibility for a stable, peaceful, and prosperous rules-based order in the maritime domain in distant geographies. So through Mahasagar, what India signaled was that it was ready to take on more engagement in distant geographies. So beyond its immediate Indian Ocean neighborhood, it was a signal that it is ready to take on more action for the broader Global South and leadership of the Global South more broadly.
Just quickly on that, what regions then was it expanding to look at?
Yes. So India has framed it in terms of the broader Global South, but because it's exclusively sort of a maritime vision, we can expect more engagement in the Pacific. We can, especially with the small island states there, and in Latin America. So these are the regions where India is looking at. Now, it's interesting because India is talking about the Global South. And as you can understand, that's a huge geography. It's still a very new initiative. The geographical contours of this has not been defined, but it is sending a signal. It is sending a very important message. It was announced through a speech, which was made by Prime Minister Modi. And because India does not release foreign policy documents, these speeches are very important because they send a signal as to what India is looking to do. So I think that way Mahasagar is very important. It'll be very interesting to see what initiatives India announces under Mahasagar in this coming year. And coming back to the key developments, I think like you pointed out, India-US relations, Marie, that has been very, very significant. A lot happened. There was a lot of turbulence there. And I think it's important not just because of the implications it has for the bilateral ties, but because it is also going to have an impact on how India is shaping its relations with other partners, especially when it comes to Washington's adversaries. So I think that is also very important, and that has shaped a lot of India's foreign policy decisions in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, a big year and a lot happening. Do you think these developments, especially between India and the US, do you think they're going to have a long-term impact? Or do you think things will kind of return to the old status quo?
Well, that is a very interesting question. And I have to say, it is a very difficult one to answer simply because, as we've seen with President Trump's foreign policy, it is very unpredictable. So what I will say is that prior to President Trump coming to power in his second term, India-US relations were at an all-time high. And that was not something that developed overnight. It's a relationship which has been built for over 25 years now. It took sustained political will, high-level ministerial visits, defense engagements, technology commitments. So there was a lot going on there. And over 25 years, this trust has been built. President Trump's moves have definitely had some impact there. Whether that will have a long-term impact or not, honestly, it remains to be seen. I am positive, because there's been a lot going on in the background. So we've seen defense cooperation has continued. Sergio Gore's appointment as the ambassador, who has very close links to President Trump, is expected to expedite the trade deal. But whether it will return to the status quo or not, I'm not sure. But I do think a new status quo will emerge between these two countries, and a lot will depend on how President Trump continues to sort of, prioritize this relationship or not. And in the short term, I see some challenges, but in the long term, I believe that the relationship will remain resilient.
And I think, we're seeing globally a lot of U.S. allies and partners kind of like reconsidering or understanding how their relationship with the United States works, reevaluating things. 2026 has already gotten off to quite a volatile start to the year, so I think India's not alone. I think last year there was a particularly interesting moment when kind of the pressure on India over buying oil from Russia was kind of hitting its crescendo, and pressure from the U.S. around that was heating up. Then Prime Minister Modi went to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. And while there, he appeared to be quite friendly with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. There were a lot of photo ops taken with that. Do you think this was just to send a message, or does it signal something about India's strategic intent moving forward?
Right. So to begin with, the SCO is a very important platform for India. The engagement shouldn't come as a surprise, because for India, SCO is the platform to showcase to the world that it is a non-aligned country. It can engage with multiple countries which have different ideologies. And we've seen that with the BRICS as well. So SCO has always been an important platform for India. The closeness with President Putin, of course, again, not very surprising, because India and Russia have long-standing civilizational ties. And the personal camaraderie between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin has been on display at various occasions. With China, yes, it was a bit tricky because, of course, since 2020, India and China had been engaged in a border clash. But it is also noteworthy that the meeting took place after a border agreement was announced between the two sides. So that was the immediate setting to the closeness that you're referring to between President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi. Again, I would not read too much into it, because it's part of like the cyclical nature of India-China relations. If you look back, it follows a similar pattern. There are still a lot of unresolved tensions, sort of like the strategic infrastructure build-up along the borders, and even heightened military presence are still there. And India is deeply uncomfortable with increasing Chinese presence in South Asia, especially in the Indian Ocean. These challenges are there. There does remain a trust deficit. I would say that right now what we're experiencing is a tactical rapprochement. It's a thaw in relations for sure. And yes, the timing of it is not a coincidence. Definitely, there was a message being sent out specifically to Washington. And the message again was the same, that India is a non-aligned country. It has multiple partnerships, and it will continue to engage with all sides on its own terms for its own national interest. So it does follow the general pattern of Indian foreign policy, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that theme of, India building up multiple partnerships rather than putting all their eggs into one basket, can also be seen in the fact that we saw India, get much closer with Australia over the last 12 months. And in October, Indian Defense Minister Rajnath Singh visited Australia. And that's the first time that that's happened in 12 years. While here, they signed 3 key agreements. So why do you think that we've seen such strides in the India-Australia relationship at this time?
So I think Defense Minister Rajnath Singh's visit was a part of the overall positive bilateral trajectories and ties since 2020, when the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership was signed. It's a reflection of the growing recognition that both India and Australia need each other, and they have shared views on what a stable balance of power looks like in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, the concerns about Chinese naval expansion and the need to secure supply chains is the unsaid driver of closer ties. But as you pointed out, I think it is about both countries looking to diversify their partnerships. And the fact that they're both strong democracies has been the starting point. But now what we're witnessing is a relationship which is not only symbolic, but one that has translated to operational coordination. They have complementary strengths, and they're using that. Australia seems to understand India's sensitivities. And this is something that, especially when it comes to India's ties with Russia, and we've seen Minister Wong address this question actually when it came up, where Australia respects the fact that India has relations with Russia, and that does not seem to be an impediment for bilateral ties. And that is something which I think has given the scope for this relationship to grow. Apart from that, I also think that participation in multilateral groupings like Quad have definitely helped build closer ties at the bilateral level. So yes, I think it is a very exciting point at India-Australia relations, and they've grown from strength to strength, and we can only expect this convergence to grow further in the future.
Yeah, and do you think that Australia and India see eye to eye on issues like, I guess, the threats that they're facing in the Indian Ocean region, but also the prioritization of the Indian Ocean region and their own national strategies?
I definitely think they do see eye to eye when it comes to maritime threats in the region. There's been alignment, and this alignment has actually always been there. So whether it is in terms of sea lane security, freedom of navigation, or even just preventing a single power from dominating the Indo-Pacific at large. But like I pointed out, what we're now witnessing is operational coordination. And this is something which is reflected in the increasing complexity of the AUSINDEX bilateral exercises as well. On the question of prioritization of the Indian Ocean, that's an interesting one because it's not. And that is simply a product of geography. So for India, which is surrounded by the Indian Ocean on 3 sides, it's obviously the most important strategic theater. That's its immediate neighborhood, its immediate maritime neighborhood. It faces key security risks from there. So the 2008 terrorist attack, it was carried out using the Indian Ocean lanes, sea lanes of communication. So definitely the prioritization of Indian Ocean in India's strategic thinking is more than Australia, which is a country which faces 3 oceans. And this is something that was actually very interesting because of my experience being here as part of this fellowship as well, where I understood just how far Perth is from the capital. And it was a long flight from here to Perth. And that honestly made me also realize just how vast Australia is. So indeed, I would say, as many experts here have characterized it, Indian Ocean is Australia's second sea. It is neglected. But having said that, I do see a lot of change happening there. Especially with Australia's prioritization of the Northeast Indian Ocean in official documents. And that is where I see key convergences because the Northeast Indian Ocean overlaps with India's South Asia sub-region of the Indian Ocean, which is India's immediate maritime neighborhood. So when it comes to this shared geography, I do see both countries prioritizing it. And that is a positive development. And and as I argue in my research here as well, this is the area where the 2 countries can and should further work together.
I mean, it's an interesting point you make about Australia being so spread out because so many of its most populous cities are all on the eastern seaboard and they all are on the Pacific Ocean. And it's, a fairly long flight to get to Perth, and there isn't a lot like in the middle of the country in between. So you're flying over, and so for people going to Perth, a lot of people haven't been to Perth. It's a long ways away, and so the Indian Ocean is not necessarily front of mind for people on the eastern seaboard. But I think that neglect or lack of awareness around it is what led to some of the scenarios where we see some of the threats start to grow and increase in that region. And you're launching a new report, Securing the Indian Ocean, You're launching a new report, Securing the Indian Ocean, Elevating the India-Australia Maritime Partnership. So how aligned do you think India and Australia's strategic issues are on maritime issues, particularly around this shared region that maybe Australia has not spent as much time and energy focusing on?
There's definitely alignment because both countries do see eye to eye when it comes to the maritime security threats the region is facing. But the challenge is that the nature of these threats are rapidly evolving. So if we look at something like maritime cybersecurity threats, the nature and intensity of that has been increasing over the past few years. The challenge, therefore, would be to keep the pace of coordination and cooperation in line with the nature of these threats. And it is the smaller littoral countries in the region which are actually extremely vulnerable to these threats. So a key argument which I make in the report, if I may share here, is that India and Australia need to coordinate their capacity building measures when working in these island and littoral states to strengthen overall regional capacity, specifically when it comes to non-traditional security threats, which is a near existential threat for many of these low-lying littoral and island countries. So while this alignment is there, I believe that there needs to be a greater push and greater coordination, especially when it comes to issues of regional security.
Can you talk a little bit more about what sort of threats we're seeing, if they're rapidly evolving? You mentioned the cyber threats, but I guess specifically for the littoral and island nations, what sort of threats are we seeing now increase there that would be different to a traditional, what we think of as a defense or security threat?
Right. I think specifically if we look at the Indian Ocean at large, the Houthi pirate attacks, that is a strong reminder that piracy remains a threat. And the nature of that threat has also evolved because now they have access to technologies like drone technologies and access to a lot of weapons, which have become much more easily available to them. So the nature of the piracy threat in that sense has changed. Apart from that, illegal and unreported fishing, IUU fishing, is something that continues to remain a threat. Maritime accidents in the region have increased as well. And this has to do with sort of like lax governance capabilities on their end. So the challenge, therefore, specifically for the littoral and small island states is the fact that limited resources coupled with responsibility over vast ocean areas. So for Sri Lanka, for example, its SAR region, which is a search and rescue region, is 28 times its landmass. So that just gives a sense of the intensity of these challenges. So, of course, these are some of the challenges from the non-traditional security perspective. Apart from that, rising naval competition specifically between India and China is also a source of maritime insecurity in this region. There are concerns about increasing militarization of the Indian Ocean, which has long been sort of classified as the zone of peace. There's a lot of activity happening here, which is changing the very nature of the Indian Ocean. But this also means that middle power countries need to come together to ensure security of the Indian Ocean.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. So I guess, how do you think Australia and India can work together, I guess, to counter some of these novel and emerging threats that they're seeing in the region?
Right. So a lot has been happening, as we've discussed earlier as well. The partnership has grown, the maritime focus of the relationship has grown, but in my assessment, it remains very heavily focused on military security threats. It's time to prioritize the non-traditional security threats the region is facing as well. And one specific area where I see cooperation is still not institutionalized would be when it comes to Coast Guard level cooperation. So while the Indian Coast Guard has regular interactions with the Maritime Border Command, which is the de facto Coast Guard for Australia, it's not a formal institutionalized cooperation between these two countries. So to begin with, a memorandum of understanding between these two, between the Indian Coast Guard and the Australian Maritime Border Command would go a long way in establishing staff linkages, in establishing more contact between the two sides where they can share understandings of these common challenges that they face and share their practical experiences as well. On that front, I think the Dosti exercise, which is an exercise which is held between Maldives, Sri Lanka and the Indian Coast Guard, and Bangladesh has participated previously here as an observer. This exercise is very important because it deals specifically with many of these non-traditional challenges which I spoke about earlier. So I do think in an Australian participation in the Dosti exercise will go a long way in not just helping Australia become more familiar with this, with the Northeast Indian Ocean region, which it is identified as its immediate region and primary area of military interest, but it will build these linkages which will help ensure regional security as well.
So what obstacles do you think the two countries will need to overcome in order to be able to work together on these issues in a meaningful way?
I think the obstacle would be ensuring this momentum in ties, ensuring sustained attention. Because as we've seen, both India and Australia, of course, are diversifying partnerships and they're looking to engage with multiple countries. So making sure that they continue giving this bilateral relationship priority would be the immediate challenge that they're facing. Apart from that, if we look at the broader strategic relationship, I think signing of the free trade agreement, which still remains stalled. We still have what is an interim agreement, the ECTA agreement between the two sides. Signing a full trade agreement faces some challenges. There are some sticky issues there which needs to be resolved. And on the defense front, defense technology cooperation is one area which is really lagging behind. And I think the reason for that is there's still a lack of understanding between the two sides on the systems that they use. And this is where I think the question of Russia comes in a little bit because of India's continued reliance on Russian military systems. There is some hesitation there as well. So these are areas which will require political dialogue. These are areas which require sustained dialogue. So political will from both sides to continue working together would be key to ensuring that the momentum in ties continues.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking us through kind of these developments and, India's relationships with countries around the world. I'd love to get your by the numbers stat on this topic. What do you have for us today?
As I alluded to throughout this podcast, that the relationship between India and Australia has really grown since the signing of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. And I found something very interesting, which was that between May 2022 till December 2025, there have been 31 Australian ministerial visits to India, 22 Indian ministerial visits to Australia. Now, the reason I've chosen 2022 is because, of course, between 2020 to 2022, COVID really hit worldwide and placed restrictions on in-person travel. But interestingly, before that, between 2010 to April 2022, there were just 17 Australian ministerial visits to India and 9 Indian ministerial visits to Australia.
Wow.
So these kind of high-level interactions clearly have given a momentum to bilateral ties. I think these numbers do bring that out, don't they?
Absolutely. And I also think the gap that we have there from COVID, I think there was probably... I think COVID shaped a lot of perspectives on, these geopolitical ties. And so maybe Australia and India reshaped their thinking about the priority of each other as these strategic partners. And so there just seems to be a clear demarcation between before COVID and after COVID. And you're right, the momentum is building. So it'll be exciting to see where it goes from here. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And if you, our listeners, like what you've heard on this podcast, I highly recommend you check out Rochele's report, Securing the Indian Ocean, Elevating the India-Australia Maritime Partnership on ussc.edu.au. And as we wrap up, I'd like to point out a couple of other podcasts that may be of interest. Our CEO, Dr. Michael Green, is co-host of the Asia Chessboard. And I'd also recommend checking out the USSC Live podcast series that runs recordings from our major live events, including the live launch event for Rochele's report. You can find these on our website or wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, Rochele, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marie.